This video here is a loose follow-up to a couple of things. Firstly, my video titled "What is wrong with Anthony Joshua?" And secondly, Hatman's video that he did recently on Robert Garcia's comments about AJ's mindset. I'll leave both of those linked in the description box and maybe the pinned comments, so you can check those out. I'd encourage you to do so before listening on this video. But also, I received a comment on my most recent live stream from Byron. Shout out to you, Byron. And he asked me about developing mental resilience, mental strength, and the right mindset for boxing. And so I feel like this is an appropriate time to actually address this question and go into more depth because of what we've seen from Anthony Joshua recently. And now we all know what's happened. Many people, including myself, have chimed in, given our take on Joshua's behaviour following the Alexander Usyk rematch, describing some of the potential reasons behind his outburst and his behaviour. But also some people have gone one step further and tried to prescribe some next steps for Anthony Joshua. This is something that Hatman highlighted in the aforementioned video. So I'm going to actually try and do my own thing here. And I'm going to take this opportunity to further answer Byron's question about cultivating mental resilience. And I'm going to try and use Anthony Joshua's career as a bit of an example, almost like a case study. And now, just to get into this, bear with me. For those who don't know, maybe you're new to the channel, one of my passions alongside boxing is physical culture or strength and conditioning, whatever you want to call it. Basically, the practice of developing strength and other athletic qualities. Bit of a tongue twister there. Through my formal education, but also my personal experiences in this field, one of, if not the most important principles that I've learned is progressive overload. And to put this simply for people who may be not familiar with this term, this is the gradual challenging of your body's capabilities. And these challenges provide a stimulus for adaptation and therefore growth and improvement. So, to put it even more simply, if you have no progressive overload, there is no challenge. And if there's no challenge, there's no improvement. You know, that's a very simplistic way of putting it. It is a lot more tricky, and it requires a bit more intelligence to actually nail this in practicality. But in terms of principles, there it is. And now this is a very mainstream understanding of successful and productive training. There's nothing new here. You go onto any training website, speak to any coach who's worth speaking to, and they will tell you that, yeah, you have all these other things, all these other variables, all these other principles, but first and foremost, your training needs to be progressive. For it to be productive, it needs to be progressive, so on and so forth. However, this is a principle that is less commonly explored in relation to or relative to sports psychology. Specifically, we're talking about the psychology of athletes here, the performers. And within the realm of sports psychology, from what I've seen in my experience, there is a focus on identifying the symptoms of various psychological states that an athlete may go through, and the symptoms and how they may impact the performance of the athlete. In my experience, as I say, please feel free to signpost me to anything that states otherwise. But there's less of an insight and exploration into how to actually cultivate and develop a strong and effective mindset for sporting success. In this case, we're talking about boxing. And now, alluding to boxing, the importance of a strong mindset is very much recognized and actually appreciated within boxing, especially by some of the most legendary fighters and trainers. Some of these personalities, some of these legendary fighters and trainers, actually go as far as stating that the hardest part of boxing is the mental aspect. And of course, we can all look at boxing here and appreciate and understand that a strong mindset is obviously needed for a brutal combat sport like boxing. It's really a no-brainer, pardon the pun. But just to loop back to the physical training and the principle of progressive overload, this principle it's in place to allow an athlete to gradually build an athletic quality. keyword being build. Imagine you have person A, I can't be bothered to think of the name, so we'll just say person A, who heads into the weight room, into the S&C suite, and attempts to lift the heaviest weight he can, believing that he's now building strength. Now, many people would do that. Many people kind of miss the mark. But person A isn't building strength, not truly. What person A is doing is actually testing his strength. He's pitting his ability up against the largest weight he can and seeing if he can overcome it, if he can overcome this resistance in front of him. And let's imagine another person B, who goes into the same weight room, but instead of maxing out the bar for one life and death struggle of a rep that he may or may not get through, may not even complete the rep, person B keeps a couple of plates off the bar and shoots for a few more high quality but stimulating reps. Lifting, and person B is going to be lifting less weight per rep, but accumulating more quality total tonnage across the session, while also accumulating less wear and tear and putting himself at a lower risk of a catastrophe by trying to overcome this massive weight. And in the long run, person A continues to hammer himself in the gym, day in and day out, trying to just break an inevitable plateau that his body just can't overcome, constantly testing his strength rather than actually taking the time to build it and to cultivate it and work through that plateau in a productive fashion. Person B, on the other hand, a bit more intelligent, a bit more has a bit more of an eye of the future, beginning with the end in mind more. He continues to have quality training sessions where he just makes slight improvements week to week, gradually building strength in a sustainable fashion. And every now and then he'll be curious and he'll test his strength just to see how far he's progressed. Now, if we take this analogy, and you're probably thinking, what the hell does this have to do with mental strength and resilience in boxing? Well, if we look at Anthony Joshua's career, I think it's fair to say that his career has been more about testing and less about building. It's really no secret that Anthony Joshua has been learning on the job for essentially his whole career. And this is all of this while fighting some very formidable opposition. And now Anthony Joshua deserves credit because he's done very well to get as far as he has. But I believe that we are now starting to see that dreaded plateau, that stabilization, if you want, of no improvement. And I don't think this plateau has necessarily come in technical ability. I believe that for the most part, we've seen Anthony Joshua learn in each of his fights and show something new or a bit more polish, just little bits and pieces. But we're seeing the plateau in mental strength and confidence. And the real kicker about plateaus is not that the progress stops. The real kicker is that after a while, the plateau starts to turn into a decline if they are not dealt with intelligently. And that's what we've seen with Anthony Joshua. I believe that the character and the resilience and the mental strength of Anthony Joshua it was progressing, maybe not in the fashion it should have, because it was always these, and Hatman's spoken about this, Joshua always seemed like he was going life and death in his fights. And, it provided great entertainment for us because, okay, yeah, this is a pay-per-view fight, but it's going to be thrills and spills. It's going to be most likely a brutal knockout, but maybe Anthony Joshua is going to get knocked out himself. And of course, going into the Andy Ruiz fight, his confidence understandably took a massive knock because he was obliterated. He was doing well for the first few rounds, and then he just got absolutely splattered around the ring by Ruiz. Very humiliating. And many people have, it's quite clear to see that Joshua's confidence hasn't been the same, and many people have observed this. And so I think, yeah, Joshua got his revenge on Andy Ruiz, but that was only a small improvement in his confidence, a small increase, and it wasn't enough to truly make up the difference. So the drop in self-confidence, the drop in resilience of the back of the Andy Ruiz first fight was way too big for the rematch to actually reverse. And of course, he had the Pulev fight, and yeah, even then he didn't really look himself. It looked better than the Ruiz rematch, a bit more self-assured, but still didn't look like he had that swagger back. And then of course he's had the two Alexander Usyk fights, which have compounded, the two losses on the trot in a row. It's compounded that lack of self-confidence, and we're starting to see the manifestation of that, and the pressure start to get to Joshua. But that is, we're talking about mental resilience, character, and mental strength. And I'm fully of the belief, absolutely of the belief, that these qualities can be developed just as an athlete's muscles and strength and athletic capacities can be developed. But it's all about that progressive overload. And so, and Hatman, in one of his videos, he made a comparison between Joshua's resume and Lennox Lewis's, Mike Tyson's, Tyson Fury's, and Deontay Wilder's. And he said that Tyson Fury actually had a better developmental route to his first title fight against Klitschko, which I believe was in his 25th fight. And I believe that's absolutely true, because if we look at Joshua in his career, he's jumping into these massive stadium-filling pay-per-view title fights, and those are more of tests. Yes, you're going to gain experience from them, but for a developing fighter like Joshua, it's almost the equivalent of just going into the weight room and seeing how much you can handle, not taking these incremental tests of stuff that you can handle and gradually upping the challenge. Whereas if you look at Tyson Fury, who, yeah, maybe it's not the most clear-cut comparison, because I think it's fair to say that Tyson Fury is more naturally confident than Anthony Joshua. I think most people will agree on that. But he actually followed, Tyson Fury, this is, a more traditional route to his first title fight, where he had these gradually tougher but still manageable fights at, say, domestic level. And these were enough to challenge him from a technical perspective, an ability perspective, but also his mentality, because he was never really a risk of drowning. Yeah, there were going to be some rough moments, but it's always something that if he had the will and if he had the confidence to, he'd be able to get through. And these fights, they may seem significant at the time they're happening because they're lower level, they're domestic level fights, and yeah, maybe it looks bad because Tyson Fury maybe looks a bit rough against less than stellar opposition. But what these allow Tyson Fury to do is develop his ability and come through and really cement his faith, but his confidence in his own boxing ability going into his biggest fights, because he's now experienced a wide variety of scenarios in his early fights. And that's proven to himself that he has ability that he can rely on. And it just strengthens his mindset. And in retrospect, I think it's fair to say that Fury's career was much about building and less about testing. Joshua has been the flip side. It's been more about testing, because that's what, and it is admirable. Do not get me wrong, it is admirable. But if we're looking at this through the, from a perspective of development and cultivation, because that's ultimately what Byron's question was, you really want to go through a route of gradually building. It takes time. You want to go to progressively bigger challenges, because in boxing there can be a culture of sometimes you just have to jump into the deep end, and if you're not good enough, that's it, you weren't made for it. I think that's a very simplistic, overly simplistic way of looking at these things, especially sports psychology, which is so nuanced. Sports psychology lies most of these psychological states and traits, they lie on a spectrum. There's no clean cut set groups of, oh, you're this kind of person, you're that kind of person. People have a collection of different characteristics and personality traits and psychological traits that are really going to determine what kind of mind they have overall. And you need to have a way of catering for that. Some people, they need that test where they can just jump straight in and, by any means necessary, they're going to overcome what resistance they can. Anthony Joshua, to a degree, has that, but I think for the most part, it's only going to get so far before, as I say, it plateaus. And so at this point now, Anthony Joshua has to take a bit more of a traditional approach, if that makes sense. And to answer Byron's question, this is going to be about taking on the smaller challenges where you start small and you're not necessarily thinking about, all right, right now, I need to go for the biggest challenge. You're thinking the bigger challenges can wait down the line. I need to develop my mental strength. I need to get some momentum. I need to prove to myself that I can do this, because this is a building process. It's not about just going into the deep end and learning on the fly, because yeah, you may be able to do that, but someone else who's taken the time, they've invested days, weeks, months, years into developing their confidence and developing their ability, that's going to be steadfast. That's going to be cast iron. It's going to be cemented. Whereas someone who's learning on the fly, it's going to be hit or miss sometimes. If it's good enough, it's great. If it's not, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have any reserve to go to. So yeah, maybe I'll do a bit more of a practical, like my kind of a follow-up to this video of my advice in terms of building mental strength. Obviously, take it with a pinch of salt. You know, who the hell am I? But I like to think I know a bit about this stuff, a bit of a logical approach that people can follow, because mental strength, these kind of things, mental strength, motivation, work ethic, confidence, to a degree, they are genetic. However, as I spoke about in the live stream, your environment and your actions, the things you do in your life and the environment you grow up in, they can help to shape your mindset as a person, your personality. Absolutely, that is absolutely true. So I hope that gives people hope that there is still you can do. If you feel like you don't have the right mindset now, don't feel like, oh, I'm just not born for it. Well, yeah, you may not be as naturally confident or naturally motivated or naturally resilient as another person, but that doesn't mean you can't still cultivate and improve your current level of these qualities. So yeah, that's all from me for now for this video. Let me know what you think of what I've raised. Do you think it's valid? Do you agree, disagree? Do you think it's absolute BS? And let me know if you want maybe some more practical takeaways. Maybe I can do a video on that. But for now, less testing, more building, people. Leave your comments in the comment section below and I'll get back to you. Thanks for listening as always, and I'll catch you in the next video.